I never thought the day would come when the two people who once swore they loved me the most would join forces to destroy me. It started on a Tuesday. Funny, isn't it? Most people expect life-shattering events to happen on big days, anniversaries, holidays, moments you circle on a calendar. But this ambush came disguised as an ordinary weekday. I walked into the office I built from scratch. Every chair, every desk, every polished piece of chrome and glass, I paid for it. And yet, when I stepped inside, the air felt wrong. Too still, too heavy, like the moment before a thunderstorm, when you can feel the static crawling along your skin. They were waiting for me in the conference room. My wife, looking like she'd just stepped out of a lifestyle magazine. Perfect hair, perfect nails, perfect mask of calm contempt. And next to her, my ex-girlfriend, dressed like she owned the place. I didn't need anyone to tell me what was about to happen. My gut already knew. My wife spoke first. "We've decided it's time for you to step down." We. That word hit me harder than any insult ever could. Not I, not the board. We, the woman I came home to every night, and the woman I once thought I'd marry, standing side by side like generals in a coup. I should have been angry. I should have been ready to fight. But all I felt was this strange, icy calm. Because while they thought they were cornering me, they had no idea they were standing on the edge of a cliff. And I was the one holding the map. "Step down?" I asked, my voice even. "From my own company?" My ex smirked. "It's not yours anymore. You signed the restructuring agreement last year, remember?" Oh, I remembered. What they didn't know was that when I signed that stack of papers, late at night, after a long negotiation, pen scratching my signature on page after page, I'd slipped in a little something of my own, a clause, buried so deep in the legal jargon that even the sharpest corporate lawyer would have skimmed past it. It was my safety net, my ace, my silent insurance policy against betrayal. I leaned back in my chair, let them think they'd won. My wife's lips curled into this smug little half-smile, the kind people wear when they think the conversation is over. My ex crossed her arms like a queen surveying conquered land. And that's when I decided I wasn't going to stop them. I was going to let them walk straight into the trap. The days that followed were surreal. I played the role perfectly. The humiliated man, the ousted CEO, the husband too shocked to fight. Friends sent me condolences. My phone buzzed with pity texts. My wife moved through the house like she was already a widow, wearing that same cool expression that made me wonder if she was actually enjoying this. But while she planned her escape, I was planning the reveal. See, the clause I buried in that contract wasn't just about keeping my seat. It was about ownership. If I was ever removed from my position without cause, my shares in the company would triple in value, and all their voting rights would revert back to me. They could take my title, they could take my parking space, but they could never take the crown. The moment came faster than I expected. A week after the coup, I was summoned to a final settlement meeting. They wanted me to sign a mutual separation agreement, hand over the last of my executive privileges, and walk away quietly. We met in the same conference room, same glass table, same two faces staring me down like hunters who'd cornered their prey. My ex slid the papers across to me. "This will make everything clean." I looked at my wife. She didn't meet my eyes. "You're sure about this?" I asked. "Completely," she said. I nodded, signed the papers, and handed them back. And then I reached into my briefcase and pulled out another folder, a thicker one, heavier. "This," I said, sliding it across to them, is the clause you both forgot about. I wish I could describe the exact moment their faces changed, but words can't do it justice. My ex's confidence cracked first, a twitch at the corner of her mouth, a narrowing of the eyes. My wife followed, her perfect posture collapsing just slightly, like the air had been punched out of her. "This isn't legal," my ex hissed. "Oh, it's legal," I said. "It's been in effect for over a year, which means the moment you pushed me out without cause." I tapped the document. "You handed me controlling interest in everything." Silence. Heavy. Choking. I leaned forward. "So here's what's going to happen. You're both going to walk away. You're going to sign over any claims, and in return, I won't drag your names through every courtroom in the state." They left that meeting pale and shaking. I didn't just get my company back. I got my freedom back. My marriage had been a cage made of gold. My relationship with my ex a chain I thought I'd broken long ago. Now both were gone. And the best part? I never raised my voice. I never threatened. I never had to play the fool or the tyrant. I just let the contract speak for me. People think revenge has to be loud, messy, explosive. But sometimes the sweetest revenge is quiet. It's watching the ones who betrayed you realize, too late, that they were never in control. And for anyone listening to this right now on What If Anything Confessions, remember this: protect yourself before you need protection, because you never know who's plotting behind your back. Sometimes the people closest to you are the ones sharpening the knife. If you want more stories like this, stories of betrayal, revenge, and comeback victories, stick around. You won't believe what's coming next. The night after that first meeting, I didn't sleep. Not because I was afraid, but because I was replaying every little detail in my mind. The smirk on my ex's face, the calculated coldness in my wife's eyes. It wasn't sudden. This wasn't something they had thrown together in a week. No, this was a slow burn betrayal, the kind you can smell before you see. I thought back to the first time I introduced them, my wife and my ex at the same dinner table. It had been a charity gala, all champagne flutes and polite smiles. My wife had leaned in to whisper something to her. My ex laughed like it was the funniest thing she'd ever heard. That laugh stayed in my head for years. I just didn't know why. Now I did. In the weeks leading up to my firing, the signs had been there. The closed-door meetings I wasn't invited to. The hushed conversations that stopped the second I walked into a room. The sudden business trips my wife had to take. To the same cities where my ex was mysteriously holding client events. And then there was the sudden interest they both had in my schedule. It wasn't casual curiosity. It was precision tracking. I had been a fool to think they weren't aligned. But here's the thing about betrayal. Once you see it clearly, you can't unsee it. The day after the "you're stepping down" ambush, I started going through my files. Not company files, personal ones. Notes I'd taken over the years, copies of contracts, signed letters of intent. I'd kept them not because I was paranoid, but because I believed in record keeping. It's amazing how organized turns into dangerous in the right circumstances. That's when I found it. The original draft of the restructuring agreement. My little clause sitting there like a hidden tripwire, perfectly legal, perfectly binding. I remembered the night I'd inserted it. The board had been pushing for more outside investment, and I knew it would dilute my shares. I wasn't against it, but I wasn't stupid. I told my attorney to add language protecting me in case of removal without cause. What no one realized was that I expanded the definition of without cause so broadly that almost any removal would trigger it. They thought it was boilerplate. They thought it was harmless. They thought wrong. A few days after the settlement meeting, my wife tried to play normal. She made coffee in the kitchen like nothing had happened, like she hadn't just tried to erase me from my own life. I watched her pour sugar into her cup. 3 spoonfuls, always 3, and wondered how many lies she'd told me over the years. "Are you going into the office today?" she asked, without looking up. "No," I said. It was the truth. I didn't need to go in. I already had the only keys that mattered. Meanwhile, my ex wasn't subtle. She sent me an email, short, smug, dripping with fake concern. "We're hoping to resolve this quickly. No need to make things difficult." I didn't reply, because the thing about people like her? Silence unnerves them. They want a reaction. They feed on it. By staying quiet, I was letting her write her own nightmare. The trap was set. The next move was theirs, and I already knew exactly how it would end. The breaking point came on a Thursday morning. The board had called an emergency session, and I was invited, not as the CEO, but as a shareholder of interest. The phrasing alone told me they thought I was already out of the game. When I walked into that glass-walled conference room, my ex was at the head of the table. My wife sat to her left, legs crossed, blazer perfectly tailored, expression carved out of marble. The rest of the board members looked anywhere but at me. They started with the formalities. Resolutions, votes, procedural nonsense. My name came up twice. Once when they confirmed my termination, and again when they discussed transition of responsibilities. It was all theater, and I let them act it out. Halfway through the meeting, my wife leaned forward. "I think it's important," she said, "that we ensure the company's future is protected from emotional entanglements." That was her little jab, her way of implying I'd been compromised, that my judgment was clouded. I just smiled, because in about 10 minutes, I was going to hand them a document that would make every word she just said irrelevant. When they finally got to the closing business portion, I pulled out the folder. "This," I said, "is the original restructuring agreement we all signed 3 years ago." My ex shifted in her chair. My wife frowned. "You'll notice Section 14C, I continued, which outlines the conditions of removal without cause. Specifically, it states that any such removal, for any reason not constituting criminal misconduct, triggers an automatic buyout of my shares at a preset valuation." I paused. "That valuation," I said, "was based on the company's projected worth as of last quarter, $12 million. Silence. It wasn't just the number. It was the realization that they had walked me right into a payday bigger than anything I could have negotiated myself. The chair of the board looked like he'd swallowed glass. My ex's jaw tightened. My wife's pen slipped from her fingers. "I'll expect payment in full within 30 days, I said, standing. "And as per the same agreement, I am released from any non-compete clauses effective immediately." Translation: not only were they paying me, but I could start a rival company the next day if I wanted to. I didn't wait for them to respond. I walked out of that room with the contract in one hand and my phone in the other. Outside, the city felt different. Brighter, louder. I wasn't just free. I was holding the kind of leverage most people only dream about. Back home, my wife tried to mask her panic. She'd expected me to come back defeated, humiliated. Instead, I walked in like I'd just won the lottery. "What happened?" she asked, her voice too calm. "Oh," I said, "just tying up loose ends." She didn't press, because somewhere deep down, she already knew she'd lost. Over the next few weeks, I didn't see my wife much. She spent most of her time with friends, which was code for the ex-CEO I'd just legally bled dry. Fine by me. Her absence gave me time to move in silence. While they were busy celebrating my downfall, I was setting up meetings with investors, quietly building a new company on the bones of the old one. The industry was still hungry for what we had created, and now I could deliver it without the dead weight of betrayal attached. The cracks in their alliance came faster than I expected. I'd heard from a mutual contact that my ex was furious. She had banked on my removal being the end of me, not a multi-million-dollar launch pad. The payout had gutted their liquidity, forcing them to cut costs and delay projects. That's when I realized something beautiful. Their partnership wasn't built on trust. It was built on mutual benefit. And now that benefit was bleeding out by the day. 2 weeks after my buyout cleared, I got a call. It was my wife. "You need to come home," she said, her voice trembling. I almost laughed. I hadn't needed to come home in months. But something in her tone told me this wasn't just a plea. It was fear. When I walked in, she was pacing the living room. "They're going to sue me," she blurted. "She says I promised her things I can't deliver. She's talking about fraud." I sat down, unhurried. "And why?" I asked. "Would that be my problem?" She stopped pacing, eyes wide. "You can't just let her destroy me," she said. "Oh, I can," I replied. "And I will. You destroyed yourself the second you chose her over me." It was like watching someone realize, in real time, that the world they thought they controlled had slipped completely through their fingers. And I wasn't done, because the best revenge isn't just winning. It's making sure they know exactly why they lost. The lawsuit hit her 2 days later. A 47-page legal assault, dripping with accusations of breach of contract, misrepresentation, and financial misconduct. I knew the tone before I even read it. My ex's lawyers had always favored intimidation over substance. The thing is, I'd been in the boardroom long enough to recognize their playbook, and this time I was just a spectator, with front row seats. Word spread fast in our industry. Investors hate instability, and my ex's new leadership team was now radioactive. Projects stalled. Clients started looking elsewhere, and many of them came to me. I didn't even have to pitch. The scandal did all the work. I watched my wife try to hold herself together. She'd been so confident when she left me, walking into my ex's arms like she was stepping into a better life. Now she was locked in legal hell, her personal assets on the line, and her business partner turning on her like a starving dog. One night she called me again. "Please," she said, "just talk to her. Make this go away." I took my time answering. Why would I save the person who tried to ruin me? There was a pause. "Because," she whispered, "I don't know how to survive this." That was the moment I realized. She had no plan B. She'd bet everything on the belief that I was weak, replaceable, and oblivious. And now she was staring down the reality. I'd been the foundation of everything, and without me, it all collapsed. But I wasn't done tightening the noose. I had one final move, the kind that doesn't just end the game, it erases your opponent from the board entirely. The next morning I woke up with a plan. Not the kind of reckless, impulsive plan people make when they're fueled by anger. No. This was the kind of plan that had been forged in the quiet heat of the night, sharpened by patience, and tempered with strategy. I brewed a pot of coffee, each drip into the glass carafe sounding like the ticking of a clock counting down to detonation. I wasn't rushing. I wasn't anxious. I was in control. The first step was to make sure the paperwork was bulletproof. I called my lawyer, one of the best corporate attorneys in the city, and someone who owed me a favor. He picked up on the second ring, groggy but instantly alert when I mentioned the situation. "Send me everything," he said. "I'll comb through it today. If that clause is as airtight as you say, they're done." I could hear the curiosity in his voice, but I didn't give him the full picture. Not yet. This wasn't a story to be told over the phone. It was a story to be shown in the right room, at the right time, to the right people. Step 2. Control the narrative. I didn't post anything on social media. I didn't rant to friends or family. I wanted them, and everyone watching, to think I was licking my wounds, quietly retreating. The truth was, every hour they spent believing that was an hour they wasted preparing for the wrong fight. By noon, my lawyer called back. His voice had the kind of restrained excitement that only comes when you know you're holding a royal flush. "You weren't kidding. This clause, it's iron. They either reinstate you immediately, or you walk with everything that actually makes the company valuable. And by the way, your wife has zero claim to any of it. Not a dime." That last part, music to my ears. For months, she had been dropping hints about wanting to upgrade her lifestyle, as if my money was her ticket to a life she hadn't lifted a finger to build. And my ex? She was banking on me leaving quietly, too embarrassed to fight back. But embarrassment wasn't part of my vocabulary anymore. Step 3. The reveal. I scheduled a meeting with the board for the following Monday. Not to argue, not to plead my case, but to lay down the reality in front of them, clean and cold. I knew they wouldn't care about my marriage, my ex, or the betrayal. They'd care about the numbers, and the numbers were on my side. All weekend, I stayed silent. I knew my wife and my ex would be gloating, maybe even celebrating together. I let them have their moment. The longer they thought they'd won, the sweeter the collapse would be. On Monday morning, I walked into that boardroom calm, almost serene. The kind of calm you see in the eyes of someone who knows exactly how the game ends. They didn't see it coming. Not one of them. The boardroom smelled faintly of polished wood and expensive cologne. 12 men and women sat around a long, gleaming table, their expressions somewhere between bored and mildly irritated. They thought I was here to grovel. They thought wrong. I didn't bring stacks of papers, binders, or even a briefcase. Just a slim black folder and a calm smile. My lawyer was already seated at the far end, sipping water like we were about to discuss something as casual as a lunch menu. "Thank you all for meeting with me," I said, my voice even. "I'll keep this short." I slid a single sheet of paper across the table to the chairman. "This," I continued, "is the clause you overlooked when you decided to terminate my role." He scanned it for 3 seconds. Then his eyes flicked up to mine. A subtle shift in his posture told me he understood immediately. But I wasn't here to let him control the room. "This clause," I said, speaking so everyone could hear, "states that if I am removed from my position without cause, all proprietary assets, patents, and intellectual property developed under my leadership revert solely to me. That includes the code base, the AI algorithms, and the licensing agreements with our biggest clients." One of the board members shifted uncomfortably. Another started whispering to the person beside her. I let the silence stretch just long enough to make them squirm. "Without me," I added, "this company doesn't have a product to sell. You don't even have the legal right to use your own logo." The chairman's jaw tightened. "This could be negotiated." I smiled faintly. "This isn't a negotiation. This is me informing you of the reality you created." The lawyer next to him cleared his throat, leaning in. "We didn't realize." "I know you didn't." I cut him off, not with anger, but with precision. You were too focused on playing corporate chess with my ex-wife and my former partner to notice the trap you walked into. It was then that the door opened. My wife, soon-to-be ex, walked in, flanked by the very same personal trainer she'd been sleeping with. She wore a smug smile, the kind you only see on people who think they've already won. "Am I late?" she asked, dropping into an empty chair without so much as a glance at me. Perfect timing. I didn't even look at her. Instead, I slid another sheet of paper onto the table, this one addressed to her directly. "This," I said, "is a financial disclosure statement, as required for the divorce proceedings. You'll notice that my personal net worth just increased by $12 million overnight, and under the prenup you signed, you're entitled to exactly none of it." The trainer's smug expression faltered. My wife's jaw slackened just enough for me to see the first crack in her confidence. In that moment, the board wasn't my audience anymore. She was. And she finally understood that this wasn't just business. This was war. The fallout started faster than I expected. By the next morning, my phone was buzzing with messages, most from journalists, a few from concerned colleagues, and more than one from old acquaintances suddenly interested in catching up. The board must have leaked the story. Or maybe it was my wife. Either way, the headline was brutal. Tech founder fired, takes company with him. It spread like wildfire. Investors panicked. Clients called in, demanding to know what was going on. And buried in every article was my name, no longer attached to the company, but to a far more interesting narrative. The quiet mastermind who walked away with the golden goose. By noon, the company's stock price had dipped 15%. By sunset, it was 25%. And me? I was in my penthouse, drinking coffee like it was just another Tuesday. I knew she was watching the news. I knew the trainer was too. Their faces must have been glued to the screen, trying to understand how the boring husband they thought they'd beaten was suddenly at the center of a corporate implosion. That night, she called. Her voice was tight, almost metallic. "You can't just destroy everything." I let the silence linger. "Funny," I said finally. "That's exactly what you tried to do to me." "This isn't about us," she snapped. "You're killing the company." "No," I corrected her, my tone calm, surgical. "You killed the company when you underestimated the man you were married to. I'm just letting the world see the truth." There was a long pause, then a low exhale. "You think this makes you the good guy?" I smiled into the phone, even though she couldn't see it. "I'm not trying to be the good guy. I'm just making sure the bad ones don't win." She hung up without another word. The next morning, the headlines were worse. CEO ousted. Ex-wife implicated in boardroom coup. Insiders say betrayal led to corporate collapse. The trainer's gym quietly deleted his profile from their website. The company's PR team released a vague statement about structural changes. And my lawyer. He called to tell me the settlement negotiations just became a lot more favorable. I didn't celebrate. Not yet. Because I knew this wasn't the end. This was just the part where they started realizing they'd picked a fight with someone who doesn't swing wild. I swing precise. It didn't take long for her to make her move. When someone's losing, they either surrender or they get sloppy. She chose sloppy. 3 days after the headlines broke, I got a thick envelope from her attorney. Inside was a letter dripping with legal jargon and desperation. Accusations of fraud, claims I'd hidden assets, and a demand for an immediate freeze on all of my accounts. I almost laughed. She wasn't just swinging in the dark. She was swinging at shadows. Everything she was accusing me of was either perfectly legal or already accounted for. What she didn't know, what she couldn't know, was that every account, every trust, every asset in my name was already bulletproof. My lawyers and I had built a fortress years before she even thought about cheating. This question mark. This was her running headfirst into a wall I'd built while she was too busy playing house with her personal trainer. Still, I had to admit, part of me enjoyed it. Watching her scramble, watching her try to land a punch and hitting nothing but air. It was like watching a bad poker player bluff into a brick wall. But then, she overplayed her hand. She leaked a fabricated tell-all to a gossip site, painting me as some manipulative, controlling monster who drove her into another man's arms. The story was full of holes. Dates didn't match. People she named denied ever being involved. But gossip spreads faster than truth, and I knew I couldn't just ignore it. So I didn't. I weaponized it. My legal team filed a defamation suit within 48 hours. But that wasn't the real hit. The real hit came when I released my own statement, not to the press, but directly to the company's remaining investors. In it, I detailed exactly how the board, led by my ex-wife's influence, had attempted to remove me without cause, while I was still the largest shareholder. I included emails, dates, names, the kind of evidence that doesn't just burn bridges, it detonates them. Within hours, the investors demanded an emergency meeting. The board was cornered. The stock plummeted another 10%. And my ex-wife, she went radio silent. For the first time since the divorce proceedings started, she wasn't laughing. That night I stood by my floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the city lights pulse below, and I realized something. This wasn't just revenge anymore. This was a reminder to her, to the board, to anyone who thought they could play me, that I didn't just survive betrayal. I turned it into a weapon. And the best part? I still had one final card to play. The final court date felt like the closing scene of a movie I'd been writing in my head for months. Except this wasn't fiction. This was the part where I stopped letting her dictate the narrative. She walked in first. Designer dress, hair perfectly styled. That same smug smirk she'd worn the day she served me divorce papers. Her boyfriend wasn't far behind, hovering in the back row like a loyal lapdog. I didn't even look at them. I didn't need to. My lawyers had prepared a presentation, one I'd specifically requested to be shown in open court. No sealed evidence, no backroom settlements. This was going to be public, on the record, for anyone to see. The judge gave the nod, and the lights dimmed slightly as the projector clicked on. Slide 1, a simple timeline. Slide 2, bank records. Slide 3, a series of emails between her and the board members discussing my removal before she filed for divorce. And then, the kill shot. Slide 4, the clause from my original shareholder agreement, the one she and her advisors had either never read or arrogantly dismissed. It stated, clear as day, that in the event of my involuntary removal, all my vested shares would automatically trigger a buyout at market value, plus a penalty multiplier for breach of good faith. I could feel the room shift. The number that appeared on the screen, calculated down to the cent, wasn't just large. It was devastating. It meant that not only was I walking away with control of my own personal fortune intact, the company now owed me a sum so massive it would force a restructuring. Her plan, dead before it hit the floor. She tried to whisper to her attorney, but I caught the panic in her eyes. The boyfriend's face went pale. The judge adjusted his glasses, reread the clause, and finally leaned back in his chair. In light of this, he said slowly, the court finds no basis for the financial demands of the petitioner. Translation: she got nothing. Not a single cent. And when the judge read my net worth aloud, now even higher thanks to the buyout penalty, her face froze in that exact mask of horror I'd imagined for months. No outburst, no screaming, just silence, the kind that tastes like victory. As the gavel came down, I gathered my papers, stood up, and buttoned my jacket. For the first time since this all began, I looked right at her. No smile, no words. Just the kind of look that says, "You played the wrong game." Outside the courthouse, the press swarmed, but I didn't stop. I had no interest in making a statement, because my statement had already been made. The courthouse steps felt different under my shoes that day, like I was walking away from more than just a legal battle. It was the last physical space she and I would ever share. Reporters shouted my name, shoving microphones toward me, hoping for a soundbite. I didn't break stride. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that silence can be louder than a headline. By the time I reached the car, my phone was already buzzing. Texts, emails, missed calls. Some from old colleagues congratulating me. Others from people I barely knew. People who had clearly been following the trial from a distance, asking if the rumors were true. And then, there were hers. She must have sent a dozen messages in the first hour alone, each one shorter than the last. First demanding to discuss the settlement, then accusing me of ruining her life. Finally, a single, desperate sentence. "We need to talk." I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. Within a week, word spread through the business community. Her name, once spoken in certain circles with a degree of respect, was now paired with whispers, rolled eyes, and cautionary tales. She'd tried to outplay me in my own arena, and in doing so had burned the very bridges she relied on to stay afloat. Her boyfriend? Gone before the month was over. Apparently, the prospect of being tied to someone with public financial humiliation on record wasn't part of his long-term plan. But me? I was free. Not just financially secure, untouchable. My contract payout meant I never had to work again if I didn't want to. But the truth, I wanted to. Not out of necessity, but because I knew every new project, every new investment would now carry the weight of this victory. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about control. And if there's one thing I've taken from this entire experience, it's that control isn't taken. It's given away, piece by piece, when you let someone distract you from your own plan. She took my attention for years. She took my trust. She even tried to take my company. But in the end, she gave me the one thing she never intended to. A reminder that the best revenge isn't just living well. It's living better than they ever imagined possible. If you enjoyed this story of betrayal, strategy, and silent retribution, make sure you subscribe to What If Anything Confessions, because there's always another game, another twist, and another ending they never saw coming.